3. Quasi-memories of the other self. Can you tell us what's going on? Nestor asked me when all of us were together that night. Where did you two go yesterday? I had forgotten LaGuardia's recommendation that we not talk about what had happened to us. I began to tell them that we had gone first to the nearby town and we had found a most intriguing house there. All of them seemed to have been touched by a sudden tremor. They perked up, looked at one another, and then they stared at LaGuardia as if waiting for her to tell them about it. What kind of a house was it? Nestor asked. Before I had time to answer, LaGuardia interrupted me. She began to talk in a hurried, almost incoherent manner. It was evident to me that she was improvising. She even used words and phrases in the Mazatec language. She gave me furtive glances that spelled out a silent plea not to say anything about it. How about your dreaming, Naguel? She asked me with the relief of someone who has found the way out. We'd like to know everything you do. I think it's very important that you tell us. She leaned over and as casually as she could she whispered in my ear that because of what had happened to us in Oaxaca I had to tell them about my dreaming. Why would it be important to you? I said loudly. I think we are very close to the end, LaGuardia said solemnly. Everything you say or do to us is of key importance now. I related to them the events of what I considered my true dreaming. Don Juan had told me that there was no point in emphasizing the trials. He gave me a rule of thumb: if I should have the same vision 3 times, he said, I had to pay extraordinary attention to it, otherwise, a neophyte's attempts were merely a stepping stone to building the second attention. I dreamed once that I woke up and jumped out of bed only to be confronted by myself still sleeping in bed. I watched myself asleep and had the self-control to remember that I was dreaming. I followed in the directions Don Juan had given me, which were to avoid sudden jolts or surprises, and to take everything with a grain of salt. The dreamer has to get involved, Don Juan said, in dispassionate experimentations. Rather than examining his sleeping body, the dreamer walks out of the room. I suddenly found myself, without knowing how, outside my room. I had the absolutely clear sensation that I had been placed there instantaneously. When I first stood outside my door, the hall and the staircase were monumental. If anything really scared me that night, it was the size of those structures, which in real life were thoroughly commonplace. The hall was about 50 feet long and the staircase had 16 steps. I could not conceive how to cover the enormous distances I was perceiving. I vacillated, then something made me move. I did not walk, though. I did not feel my steps. Suddenly I was holding on to the railing. I could see my hands and forearms but I did not feel them. I was holding on by the force of something that had nothing to do with my musculature as I know it. The same thing happened when I tried to go down the stairs. I did not know how to walk. I just could not take a step. It was as if my legs were welded together. I could see my legs by leaning over, but I could not move them forward or laterally, nor could I lift them up toward my chest. I seemed to be stuck to the top step. I felt I was like those inflated plastic dolls that can lean in any direction until they are horizontal, only to be pulled upright again by the weight of their heavy rounded bases. I made a supreme effort to walk and bounced from step to step like a clumsy ball. It took an incredible degree of attention to get to the ground floor. I could not describe it in any other way. Some form of attentiveness was required to maintain the bounds of my vision, to prevent it from disintegrating into the fleeting images of an ordinary dream. When I finally got to the street door I could not open it. I tried desperately, but to no avail. Then I recalled that I had gotten out of my room by gliding out of it as if the door had been open. All I needed was to recall that feeling of gliding and suddenly I was out in the street. It looked dark, a peculiarly lead gray darkness that did not permit me to perceive any colors. My interest was drawn immediately to an enormous lagoon of brightness right in front of me, at my eye level. I deduced rather than perceived that it was the street light, since I knew there was one right on the corner, 20 feet above the ground. I knew then that I could not make the perceptual arrangements needed in order to judge up, or down, or here, or there. Everything seemed to be extraordinarily present. I had no mechanism, as in ordinary life, to arrange my perception. Everything was there in the foreground and I had no volition to construct an adequate screening procedure. I stayed in the street, bewildered, until I began to have the sensation that I was levitating. I held on to the metal pole that supported the light and the street sign on the corner. A strong breeze was lifting me up. I was sliding up the pole until I could plainly see the name of the street, Ashton. Months later, when I again found myself in a dream looking at my sleeping body, I already had a repertoire of things to do. In the course of my regular dreaming I had learned that what matters in that state was volition. The corporeality of the body has no significance. It is simply a memory that slows down the dreamer. I glided out of the room without hesitation, since I did not have to act out the motions of opening a door or walking in order to move. The hall and staircase were not as enormous as they appeared to be the first time. I glided through with great ease and ended up in the street where I willed myself to move 3 blocks. I became aware then that the lights were still very disturbing sights. If I focused my attention on them, they became pools of immeasurable size. The other elements of that dream were easy to control. The buildings were extraordinarily large, but their features were familiar. I pondered what to do. And then, quite casually, I realized that if I did not stare at things but only glanced at them, just as we do in our daily world, I could arrange my perception. In other words, if I followed Don Juan's suggestions to the letter and took my dreaming for granted, I could use the perceptual biases of my everyday life. After a few moments the scenery became, if not completely familiar, controllable. The next time I had a similar dream I went to my favorite coffee shop on the corner. The reason I selected it was because I was used to going there all the time in the very early hours of the morning. In my dreaming I saw the usual waitresses who worked the graveyard shift. I saw a row of people eating at the counter, and right at the very end of the counter I saw a peculiar character, a man I saw nearly every day walking aimlessly around the UCLA campus. He was the only person who actually looked at me. The instant I came in he seemed to sense me. He turned around and stared at me. I found the same man in my waking hours a few days later in the same coffee shop in the early hours of the morning. He took one look at me and seemed to recognize me. He looked horrified and ran away without giving me a chance to talk to him. I came back once more to the same coffee shop and that was when the course of my dreaming changed. As I was watching the restaurant from across the street, the scene altered. I could not see the familiar buildings anymore. Instead I saw primeval scenery. It was no longer night. It was bright daylight and I was looking at a lush valley. Swampy, deep green, reed-like plants grew all over. Next to me there was a rock ledge 8 to 10 feet high. A huge saber-toothed tiger was sitting there. I was petrified. We looked at each other fixedly for a long time. The size of that beast was striking, yet it was not grotesque or out of proportion. It had a splendid head, big eyes the color of dark honey, massive paws, an enormous rib cage. What impressed me the most was the color of its fur. It was uniformly dark brown, almost chocolate. Its color reminded me of roasted coffee beans, only lustrous. It had strangely longish fur, not matted or ratty. It did not look like a puma's fur, or a wolf's or a polar bear's either. It looked like something I had never seen before. From that time on, it became routine for me to see the tiger. At times the scenery was cloudy and chilly. I could see rain in the valley, thick, copious rain. At other times the valley was bathed in sunlight. Quite often I would see other saber-toothed tigers in the valley. I could hear their unique squeaking roar, a most nauseating sound to me. The tiger never touched me. We stared at each other from 10 to 12 feet away. Yet I could tell what he wanted. He was showing me how to breathe in a specific manner. It got to the point in my dreaming where I could imitate the tiger's breathing so well that I felt I was turning into one. I told the apprentices that a tangible result of my dreaming was that my body became more muscular. After listening to my account, Nestor marveled at how different their dreaming was from mine. They had particular dreaming tasks. His was to find cures for anything that ailed the human body. Benigno's task was to predict, foresee, find a solution for anything that was of human concern. Pablito's task was to find ways to build. Nestor said that those tasks were the reason why he dealt with medicinal plants. Benigno had an oracle, and Pablito was a carpenter. He added that, so far, they had only scratched the surface of their dreaming and that they had nothing of substance to report. You may think that we've done a great deal, he went on, but we haven't. Gennaro and the Nagual did everything for us and for these 4 women. We've done nothing on our own yet. It seems to me that the Nagual set you up differently, Benigno said, speaking very slowly and deliberately. You must have been a tiger and you are definitely going to turn into one again. That's what happened to the Nagual. He had been a crow already and while in this life he turned into one again. The problem is that that kind of tiger doesn't exist anymore, Nestor said. We never heard what happens in that case. He swept his head around to include all of them with his gesture. I know what happens, La Gorda said. I remember that the Nagual one mat is called that ghost dreaming. He said that none of us has ever done ghost dreaming because we are not violent or destructive. He never did it himself. And he said that whoever does it is marked by fate to have ghost helpers and allies. What does that mean, Gorda? I asked. It means that you're not like us, she replied somberly. La Gorda seemed to be very agitated. She stood up and paced up and down the room 4 or 5 times before she sat down again by my side. There was a gap of silence in the conversation. Josefina mumbled something unintelligible. She also seemed to be very nervous. La Gorda tried to calm her down, hugging her and patting her back. Josefina has something to tell you about Eligio, La Gorda said to me. Everyone looked at Josefina without saying a word, a question in their eyes. In spite of the fact that Eligio has disappeared from the face of the earth, La Gorda went on, he is still one of us. And Josefina talks to him all the time. The rest of them suddenly became attentive. They looked at one another and then they looked at me. They meet in dreaming, La Gorda said dramatically. Josefina took a deep breath. She seemed to be the epitome of nervousness. Her body shook convulsively. Pablito lay on top of her on the floor and began breathing hard with his diaphragm, pushing it in and out, forcing her to breathe in unison with him. What's he doing? I asked La Gorda. What's he doing? Can't you see? She replied sharply. I whispered to her that I was aware that he was trying to make her relax, but that his procedure was novel to me. She said that Pablito was giving Josefina energy by placing his midsection, where men have a surplus of it, over Josefina's womb, where women store their energy. Josefina sat up and smiled at me. She seemed to be perfectly relaxed. I do meet Eligio all the time, she said. He waits for me every day. How come you've never told us that? Pablito asked in a huffy tone. She told me, La Gorda interrupted, and then went into a lengthy explanation of what it meant to all of us that Eligio was available. She added that she had been waiting for a sign from me to disclose Eligio's words. Don't beat around the bush, woman. Pablito yelled. Tell us his words. They are not for you. La Gorda yelled back. Who are they for, then? Pablito asked. They are for the Nagual, La Gorda yelled, pointing at me. La Gorda apologized for raising her voice. She said that whatever Eligio had said was complex and mysterious and she could not make heads or tails of it. I just listened to him. That's all I was able to do, listen to him, she continued. Do you mean you also meet Eligio? Pablito asked in a tone that was a mixture of anger and expectation. I do, La Gorda replied in almost a whisper. I couldn't talk about it because I had to wait for him. She pointed to me and then pushed me with both hands. I momentarily lost my balance and tumbled down on my side. "What is this? What are you doing to him?" Pablito asked in a very angry voice. Was that a display of Indian love? I turned to La Gorda. She made a gesture with her lips to tell me to be quiet. "Eligio says that you are the Nagual, but you are not for us," Josefina said to me. There was dead silence in the room. I did not know what to make of Josefina's statement. I had to wait until someone else talked. "Do you feel relieved?" La Gorda prodded me. I said to all of them that I did not have any opinions one way or the other. They looked like children, bewildered children. La Gorda had the air of a mistress of ceremonies who is thoroughly embarrassed. Nestor stood up and faced La Gorda. He spoke a phrase in Mazatec to her. It had the sound of a command or a reproach. "Tell us everything you know, Gorda," he went on in Spanish. "You have no right to play with us, to hold back something so important, just for yourself." La Gorda protested vehemently. She explained that she was holding on to what she knew because Atligio had asked her to do so. Josefina assented with a nod of her head. "Did he tell all this to you or to Josefina?" Pablito asked. "We were together," La Gorda said in a barely audible whisper. "You mean you and Josefina dreamed together?" Pablito exclaimed breathlessly. The surprise in his voice corresponded to the shock wave that seemed to go through the rest of them. "What exactly has Atligio said to you two?" Nestor asked when the shock had subsided. "He said that I should try to help the Nagual remember his left side," La Gorda said. "Do you know what she's talking about?" Nestor asked me. There was no possibility that I would have known. I told them that they should turn to themselves for answers. But none of them voiced any suggestions. "He told Josefina other things which she can't remember," La Gorda said. "So we are in a real fix. Eligio said that you are definitely the Nagual and you have to help us, but that you are not for us. Only upon remembering your left side can you take us to where we have to go." Nestor spoke to Josefina in a fatherly manner and urged her to remember what Eligio had said, rather than insisting that I should remember something which must have been in some sort of code, since none of us could make sense of it. Josefina winced and frowned as if she were under a heavy weight that was pushing her down. She actually looked like a rag doll that was being compressed. I watched in true fascination. "I can't," she finally said. "I know what he's talking about when he speaks to me, but I can't say now what it is. It doesn't come out." "Do you remember any words?" Nestor asked. "Any single words?" She stuck her tongue out, shook her head from side to side, and screamed at the same time. "No. I can't," she said after a moment. "What kind of dreaming do you do, Josefina?" I asked. "The only kind I know," she snapped. "I've told you how I do mine," I said. "Now tell me how you do yours." "I close my eyes and I see this wall," she said. "It's like a wall of fog. Eligio waits for me there. He takes me through it and shows me things, I suppose. I don't know what we do, but we do things together. Then he brings me back to the wall and lets me go. And I come back and forget what I've seen." "How did you happen to go with La Gorda?" I asked. "Eligio told me to get her," she said. "The two of us waited for La Gorda, and when she went into her dreaming we snatched her and pulled her behind that wall. We've done that twice." "How did you snatch her?" I asked. "I don't know," Josefina replied. "But I'll wait for you and when you do your dreaming I'll snatch you and then you'll know." "Can you snatch anyone?" I asked. "Sure," she said, smiling. "But I don't do it because it's a waste. I snatched La Gorda because Eligio told me that he wanted to tell her something on account of her being more level-headed than I am." "Then Atligio must have told you the same things, Gorda," Nestor said with a firmness that was not familiar to me. La Gorda made an unusual gesture of lowering her head, opening her mouth on the sides, shrugging her shoulders, and lifting her arms above her head. "Josefina has just told you what happened," she said. There is no way for me to remember. Adligio speaks with a different speed. He speaks but my body cannot understand him. No. No. My body cannot remember, that's what it is. I know he said that the Nagwal here will remember and will take us to where we have to go. He couldn't tell me more because there was so much to tell and so little time. He said that somebody, and I don't remember who, is waiting for me in particular. Is that all he said? Nestor insisted. The second time I saw him, he told me that all of us will have to remember our left side, sooner or later, if we want to get to where we have to go. But he is the one who has to remember first. She pointed to me and pushed me again as she had done earlier. The force of her shove sent me tumbling like a ball. What are you doing this for, Gorda? I asked, a bit annoyed at her. I'm trying to help you remember, she said. The Nagwal One Mattis told me that I should give you a push from time to time in order to jolt you. La Gorda hugged me in a very abrupt movement. Help us, Nagwal, she pleaded. We are worse off than dead if you don't. I was close to tears. Not because of their dilemma, but because I felt something stirring inside me. It was something that had been edging its way out ever since we visited that town. La Gorda's pleading was heartbreaking. I then had another attack of what seemed to be hyperventilation. A cold sweat enveloped me and then I got sick to my stomach. La Gorda tended to me with absolute kindness. True to her practice of waiting before revealing a finding, La Gorda would not consider discussing our seeing together in Oaxaca. For days she remained aloof and determinedly uninterested. She would not even discuss my getting ill. Neither would the other women. Don Juan used to stress the need for waiting for the most appropriate time to let go of something that we hold. I understood the mechanics of La Gorda's actions, although I found her insistence on waiting rather annoying and not in accord with our needs. I could not stay with them too long, so I demanded that all of us should get together and share everything we knew. She was inflexible. We have to wait, she said. We have to give our bodies a chance to come up with a solution. Our task is the task of remembering, not with our minds but with our bodies. Everybody understands it like that. She looked at me inquisitively. She seemed to be looking for a clue that would tell her that I too had understood the task. I admitted to being thoroughly mystified, since I was the outsider. I was alone, while they had one another for support. This is the silence of warriors, she said, laughing, and then added in a conciliatory tone. This silence doesn't mean that we can't talk about something else. Maybe we should go back to our old discussion of losing the human form, I said. There was a look of annoyance in her eyes. I explained at length that, especially when foreign concepts were involved, meaning had to be continually clarified for me. What exactly do you want to know? She asked. Anything that you may want to tell me, I said. The Nagwal told me that losing the human form brings freedom, she said. I believe it. But I haven't felt that freedom, not yet. There was a moment of silence. She was obviously assessing my reaction. What kind of freedom is it, Gorda? I asked. The freedom to remember yourself, she said. The Nagwal said that losing the human form is like a spiral. It gives you the freedom to remember and this in turn makes you even freer. Why haven't you felt that freedom yet? I asked. She clicked her tongue, shrugged her shoulders. She seemed confused or reluctant to go on with our conversation. I'm tied to you, she said. Until you lose your human form in order to remember, I won't be able to know what that freedom is. But perhaps you won't be able to lose your human form unless you remember first. We shouldn't be talking about this anyway. Why don't you go and talk to the Genros? She sounded like a mother sending her child out to play. I did not mind it in the least. From someone else, I could easily have taken the same attitude as arrogance or contempt. I liked being with her, that was the difference. I found Pablito, Nestor, and Benigno in Gennaro's house playing a strange game. Pablito was dangling about 4 feet above the ground inside something that seemed to be a dark leather harness strapped to his chest under his armpits. The harness resembled a thick leather vest. As I focused my attention on it, I noticed that Pablito was actually standing on some thick straps that looped down from the harness like stirrups. He was suspended in the center of the room by two ropes strung over a thick round transverse beam that supported the roof. Each rope was attached to the harness itself, over Pablito's shoulders, by a metal ring. Nestor and Benigno each held a rope. They were standing, facing each other, holding Pablito in midair by the strength of their pull. Pablito was holding on with all his strength to two long thin poles that were planted in the ground and fitted comfortably in his clasped hands. Nestor was to Pablito's left and Benigno to his right. The game seemed to be a three-sided tug-of-war, a ferocious battle between the ones who were tugging and the one who was suspended. When I walked into the room, all I could hear was the heavy breathing of Nestor and Benigno. The muscles of their arms and necks were bulging with the strain of pulling. Pablito kept an eye on both of them, focusing on each one at a time, with a split-second glance. All three were so absorbed in their game that they did not even notice my presence, or if they did, they could not afford to break their concentration to greet me. Nestor and Benigno stared at each other for 10 to 15 minutes in total silence. Then Nestor faked letting his rope go. Benigno did not fall for it, but Pablito did. He tightened the grip of his left hand and braced his feet on the poles in order to strengthen his hold. Benigno used the moment to strike and gave a mighty tug at the precise instant that Pablito eased his grip. Benigno's pull caught Pablito and Nestor by surprise. Benigno hung from the rope with all his weight. Nestor was outmaneuvered. Pablito fought desperately to balance himself. It was useless. Benigno won the round. Pablito got out of the harness and came to where I was. I asked him about their extraordinary game. He seemed somehow reluctant to talk. Nestor and Benigno joined us after putting their gear away. Nestor said that their game had been designed by Pablito, who found the structure in dreaming and then constructed it as a game. At first it was a device for tensing the muscles of two of them at the same time. They used to take turns at being hoisted. But then Benigno's dreaming gave them the entry into a game where all three of them tensed their muscles, and they sharpened their visual prowess by remaining in a state of alertness, sometimes for hours. Benigno thinks now that it is helping our bodies to remember, Nestor went on. La Gorda, for instance, plays it in a weird way. She wins every time, no matter what position she plays. Benigno thinks that's because her body remembers. I asked them if they also had the silence rule. They laughed. Pablito said that La Gorda wanted more than anything else to be like the Nagual Juan Matus. She deliberately imitated him, up to the most absurd detail. Do you mean we can talk about what happened the other night? I asked, almost bewildered, since La Gorda had been so emphatically against it. We don't care, Pablito said. You're the Nagual. Benigno here remembered something real weird, Nestor said without looking at me. I think it was a mixed-up dream, myself, Benigno said. But Nestor thinks it wasn't. I waited impatiently. With a movement of my head, I urged them to go on. The other day he remembered you teaching him how to look for tracks in soft dirt, Nestor said. It must have been a dream, I said. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but all three of them looked at me with pleading eyes. It's absurd, I said. Anyway, I better tell you now that I have a similar recollection, Nestor said. You took me to some rocks and showed me how to hide. Mine was not a mixed-up dream. I was awake. I was walking with Benigno one day, looking for plants, and suddenly I remembered you teaching me, so I hid as you taught me and scared Benigno out of his wits. I taught you. How could that be? When? I asked. I was beginning to get nervous. They did not seem to be joking. When? That's the point, Nestor said. We can't figure out when. But Benigno and I know it was you. I felt heavy, oppressed. My breathing became difficult. I feared I was going to get ill again. I decided right then to tell them about what Lagorda and I had seen together. Talking about it relaxed me. At the end of my recounting, I was again in control of myself. The Nagwalwan Mattis left us a little bit open, Nestor said. All of us can see a little. We see holes in people who have had children, and also, from time to time, we see a little glow in people. Since you don't see at all, it looks like the Nagwa left you completely closed so that you will open yourself from within. Now you've helped Lagorda and she either sees from within or she's merely riding on your back. I told them that what had happened in Oaxaca may have been a fluke. Pablito thought that we should go to Jenna Uro's favorite rock and sit there with our heads together. The other two found his idea brilliant. I had no objections. Although we sat there for a long time, nothing happened. We did get very relaxed, however. While we were still sitting on the rock, I told them about the two men Lagorda had believed to be Don Juan and Don Genaro. They slid down and practically dragged me back to Lagorda's house. Nestor was the most agitated. He was almost incoherent. All I got out of them was that they had been waiting for a sign of that nature. Lagorda was waiting for us at the door. She knew what I had told them. I just wanted to give my body time, she said before we had said anything. I have to be dead sure, which I am. It was the Nagwal and Jenna Uro. What's in those shacks? Nestor asked. They didn't go inside them, Lagorda said. They walked away toward the open fields, toward the east. In the direction of this town. She seemed bent on appeasing them. She asked them to stay, they did not want to. They excused themselves and left. I was sure that they felt ill at ease in her presence. She seemed to be very angry. I rather enjoyed her explosions of temper, and this was quite contrary to my normal reactions. I had always felt edgy in the presence of anyone who was upset, with the mysterious exception of Lagorda. During the early hours of the evening, all of us congregated in Lagorda's room. All of them seemed preoccupied. They sat in silence, staring at the floor. Lagorda tried to start a conversation. She said that she had not been idle, that she had put two and two together and had come up with some solutions. This is not a matter of putting two and two together, Nestor said. This is a task of remembering with the body. It seemed that they had talked about it among themselves, judging by the nods of agreement Nestor had from the others. That left Lagorda and myself as the outsiders. Lydia also remembers something, Nestor went on. She thought it was her stupidity, but upon hearing what I've remembered, she told us that this Nagwal here took her to a cure and left her there to have her eyes cured. Lagorda and I turned to Lydia. She lowered her head as if embarrassed. She mumbled. The memory seemed too painful for her. She said that when Don Juan first found her, her eyes were infected and she could not see. Someone drove her in a car over a great distance to the curer who healed her. She had always been convinced that Don Juan had done that, but upon hearing my voice she realized that it was I who had taken her there. The incongruity of such a memory threw her into agony from the first day she met me. My ears don't lie to me, Lydia added after a long silence. It was you who took me there. Impossible. Impossible. I yelled. My body began to shake, out of control. I had a sense of duality. Perhaps what I call my rational self, incapable of controlling the rest of me, took the seat of a spectator. Some part of me was watching as another part of me shook.